Hello, everyone, and welcome to CoinDesk's Crypto Regulation and Policy Show. I'm Jen Sanasi here with my co-host, Paul Hastings' partner, Renato Mariatti. Renato, it's been a while and so much has happened.
Oh my God, it's insane. It's insane. It's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much going on in the world of crypto, but we're actually going in a positive direction, Jen. There's a lot of good things to talk about, as well as, stuff that we're tracking that could be negative.
That's kind of been the theme for this year. A lot of good things to talk about when it comes to crypto regulation and policy in the US. As you know, Renato, I've been traveling the world, going to crypto conferences all over the globe, talking about regulation and policy there and what it's enabling in terms of innovation. But very excited to bring the conversation back to US shores. And Renato, I know that you were front and center at the recent SEC-CFTC roundtable. You and I have been talking about this for a long time. You know, the SEC is having these roundtables. They're progressing on discussions around crypto regulation. The CFTC has kind of been nowhere to be found. I like to think maybe they were inspired by maybe one of our conversations.
I hope so. Look, it's really important for the future of the industry that the SEC and CFTC coordinate. First of all, the legislation that's contemplated, like the Clarity Act, contemplates a very significant, I'd say very safe to say, a leading role for the CFTC, or a prominent majority role for the CFTC in regulating crypto. So it's important that they're part of the conversation. And many of the players in this space ultimately have entities that are regulated by both. They have SEC regulated entities and CFTC regulated entities. So it's really important to have these commissions talking to each other. And at that event, they talked about things like having a harmonization email address that they have. They're doing secondments of personnel from one commission to the other. But one thing that has happened, Jen, is there had been talk that SEC Chair Paul Atkins might be an interim head of the CFTC, or that they would try to merge the agencies. He publicly denied that and flatly said that is not going to happen. We just need to work together. And I really thought that this last roundtable where we actually brought everyone together was part of that. I mean, it was quite a remarkable conversation,
Mhm.
Jen, because you had TradFi, DeFi, upstarts and established platforms all together having that conversation, and it's really something that I've never seen in my lifetime, and that's really something.
For anyone who wants to see it, the live stream video is still up on CoinDesk Social, so you can go back and watch. I believe I saw a clip of Polymarket CEO Shane Copeland saying, you know, he wasn't sure if he was going to show up and be whisked away, and that was really a reality not that long ago for our industry. So to see all these agencies and leaders from, like you said, DeFi platforms, centralized platforms, TradFi platforms come together and progress this conversation, it is, like you said, remarkable, Renato. And I have to just tease one of our guests who's coming up later, former CFTC Chair Chris Giancarlo is going to join us. He's previously looked into what it would mean to merge the two agencies. So we will talk to him a little bit about that. I know it was discussed at the roundtable as well. But before we bring in our first guest, tell me a little bit about some of the color that maybe we didn't see when we were watching it on the various streams.
Sure. Look, a lot of people have been talking. There was one TradFi CEO who flipped off an upstart platform
Okay.
CEO there, which was shocking. Clips of that were making the rounds on social media. But I think, from my perspective, some of the most important stuff there, Jen, was that you actually had the TradFi platforms, the CEOs of big companies, okay, NASDAQ and CME Group and ICE and so on, coming out and saying, well, at one point, NASDAQ's like, we wish the CFTC was our regulator, which I thought was funny. But also really talking about, hey, we want to take part of innovation too. That now the folks who are in this space, the poly markets of the world and Kalshis of the world and others, they're participating in innovation, and we need Congress to catch up. We need the SEC and the CFTC to catch up so that we can participate in this innovation. We don't have the risk tolerance that these newer companies have. So we need you to give us an opportunity to catch up. We need what they call the level playing field. Of course, as you could imagine, the reason there is some fireworks there is some of the folks who are in the industry. There's the Kraken CEO, for example, was there. We're like, hey, you've had all the opportunity in the world. You can do the same thing we're doing. So you really saw an intense debate there in a way that I haven't seen at a conference or a roundtable before.
All right, we are going to get to our first guest in just a second, but one other thing I wanted to bring up with you, Renato, is the nomination process for Bryan Quintenz has been halted by the White House. That is something you and I have talked about a lot. And since the last time you and I spoke, Bryan Quintenz took to X and shared some communications between himself and the Winklevoss twins that to me showed maybe a level of frustration from Quintenz's part. Just curious to hear your thoughts before we bring in our first guest.
Yeah, look, Bryan, by all accounts, is somebody beloved in the industry, who had been a commissioner before, is very well respected. I think, I'm sure he has reason to be frustrated and disappointed that he is not going to become the CFTC chairman. The White House has pulled his nomination. I am told that there's a number of names under consideration. Everyone, I think Mike Seelig, who is at the SEC now, is helping Hester Peirce with the crypto task force, but previously had been in private practice and had been at the CFTC, is the leading candidate, but there are many others, Tyler Williams, Josh Sterling, Jill Summers, and others who are under consideration. We're still at an early stage and they haven't landed on a name yet, but really trying to find a name that has the support of the crypto industry in the way that Bryan did will be a challenge. And it's going to be important to have somebody who not only it can be a voice for crypto, but also, of course, understands the CFTC and is able to deal with some of those TradFi platforms as well.
All right, let's bring in our first guest and dig a little bit deeper into what's going on when it comes to crypto regulation and legislation in the United States. Our next guest is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets. Congressman Bryan Steil joins us now. Hey, Bryan.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Of course, thanks for being here. We got to start with, I guess, the elephant in the room. The government is shut down, and I think folks who are watching this industry are wondering what that means for progress on legislation and what it means for agencies like the SEC and CFTC that are going to have to operate with a lot less employees.
Yeah, a federal government shutdown is unproductive for everyone. It shows you how absolutely broken the spending process is in Washington. Big picture, I've had legislation would just end this process. It would just put spending on a recurring 2-week window, prevent shutdowns, take it off the table, and remove the brinksmanship that we see time and again. That's not going to pass in this short window here. How do we get out of this? We just got to fund the government for the next 7 weeks and then allow the negotiations to play out for the 2026 fiscal year appropriations, the spending process, as well as other policy priorities that people are bringing to the table. What does it mean for your federal government? It means only essential workers are at work, and they won't receive their next paycheck unless we get through this wall. And so hopefully we do, and cooler heads prevail, but it's really unproductive, in particular in areas where technically non-essential employees, as they're labeled, are actually really important in the regulatory framework. And so my hope is this doesn't last long and we don't see a substantive slowdown at the two most important agencies that relates to crypto, the SEC and the CFTC.
So, Congressman, although obviously the shutdown is important in the short term, in the industry, all eyes are on progress of the market structure bill. Obviously, the House has done its part. It passed the Clarity Act, and there's been a lot of cheering. But of course, we all know that for a bill to become a law, we need the Senate to also pass this, for some reconciliation to occur, and for a signature to also be placed on that document. So, how, from your vantage point in the House, what is your understanding of the Senate's progress in market structure?
Yeah, I was excited to be part of the team that led the Clarity Act market structure legislation through the House and moved it over to the Senate. I think what we actually saw in the House was many years of work building to the crescendo of passing clarity. So we can go back, and digital assets hearings were being held in the Financial Services Committee where I sit as far back as 2017. I mean, we had hearings in 2019. We passed legislation now going back about 2 years ago in the House under the then leadership of Patrick McHenry, which really got us up and running. So when this year we moved forward with now Chairman French Hill and myself and others, we were able to drive that through the House and actually build on the success, getting a total vote in the House of Representatives over 2/3 of the House of Representatives. In a period of time when we're in the shutdown, it shows you how amazing that is to see that much broad, nonpartisan or bipartisan support in the House. It now moves over to the Senate. The Senate does not have that track record of working in the digital asset space year after year for the past 5+ years. And so what we've seen is a little bit of a slower process in the Senate on the two most important committees, Senate Banking and Senate Ag. And I think what we see is engagement in the Senate banking side. Senator Lummis, Senator Scott have shown great leadership. Senator Haggerty, obviously showing good leadership as well as other handful of Democrats in the Senate who are coming to the table. I think we've seen it a little bit slower on the ag side. Some of this is the priorities with the Farm Bill, also an important piece of policy that needs to move through. But I think if you step back and said, Bryan, what does this mean? I would say, let's use clarity, the legislation that passed out of the House, as the true underlying framework. A lot of the compromises and deals that need to be struck to get this legislation done have been struck on the House side, where Democrats and Republicans were able to come together, working with key industry stakeholders as well. If the Senate uses that framework as base text, I actually think it could meaningfully and substantively accelerate the work of the Senate with the goal of getting this completed as soon as possible, but no later than the end of the year.
So that end of the year timeline, talk to me about what needs to happen for us to get this through by the end of the year.
Well, the Senate, you can move as fast as you want or as slow as you want. And that's a lot of the frustration. The joke in the House is we say the opposition is the Democrats, but the enemy is the Senate. And I say that jokingly. But the key here is for the Senate to move forward, to hold hearings on the legislative text, and then begin and get to a markup where they can finalize the formation of the text and work between Senate Banking and Senate Ag. One of the most difficult things to do on Capitol Hill is to get committees to work together. In the House, we actually really built on the success of last Congress, when it was then Dusty Johnson and French Hill who were working together at the committee level and the subcommittee level in the House to actually get the legislative text done. On the Senate side, we need that same type of inner working between Senate Banking and Senate Ag. There's been a lot of conversations and a lot of work, but getting that down to a final resolution can either occur quickly or slowly. But my hope is that the pressure that they're seeing and the opportunity we have in front of us to really provide this regulatory framework for the industry will provide consumer protection and unleash innovation in development in the United States. And so the more pressure we're putting on the Senate, and again, I'm of the belief that using clarity as baseline text allows us to dramatically accelerate the completion of this important legislation.
So obviously we have, focused a lot on market structure, but there are other things happening. There are other pieces of legislation that can make a difference. I know, for example, there was a hearing just the other day on taxes and tax treatment and crypto. What else, if you could talk about that hearing and what else the Congress is doing that could potentially impact the industry.
That was a really good hearing in Senate Finance, which comes back to what a core tax principle should be, is that you don't have a taxable event until you have a realized gain. If this was mining of actual gold, it's actually pretty straightforward. You don't get taxed if you're a mining company until you sell the gold, not the moment that gold comes into your possession. We should have a similar framework for digital assets and provide that clarity in the space, again, with the purpose of encouraging that innovation and development or mining here in the United States of America. The other big opportunity that I think is in front of us is to make sure that we're using the committee and subcommittees to actually oversee the regulatory agencies. And so if you're in the weeds, we overturned Chevron deference, giving a lot of power back to elected members of Congress and taking it away from unelected bureaucrats at agencies. And this then means as the SEC and the CFTC are working through the rulemaking of First Genius, which is also already signed into law, and hopefully in the near future, Clarity. What we can do is have a huge voice in making sure these rules and regulations are following congressional intent and that they're getting done in a timely manner. I think that is one of the biggest opportunities that we have in front of us, in particular, following the overturning of Chevron deference by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago or last year.
All right, Congressman, we know that you are on a tight schedule here, so we are going to let you go. Thanks so much for joining the program, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the show soon.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
That was the chairman of the Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Congressman Bryan Steil. All right, we are moving right along here. I teased this at the beginning of the show. Former CFTC Chairman Chris Giancarlo, also known as Crypto Dad, joins us now. Hello.
It's great to be with you, and it's great to follow Chairman Steil. He's a real champion. He's done great work, and his perspective on things. He's such a clear. He can clearly express it when he was talking about taxes, and focusing on how gold is mined and how the tax effect is there. It's such a clear image that hopefully our leadership on Capitol Hill can get that right and get the tax provisions right. So I'm delighted to join you. Delighted to follow him.
Well, let's start there. Let's talk a little bit about the tax hearing. Talk to us about some of your takeaways. What stood out to you?
Well, there's so much going on that it's interesting how he so clearly sees the work that he did on clarity. That's done. Senate needs to follow that. Now let's focus on tax. What I think all Americans should be impressed with is the purposefulness of leadership right now in getting these core elements necessary for a healthy, functioning crypto system, let alone making America the crypto capital of the world. It's such a contrast to the frustration and the hindrance and the stifling of this innovation that took place previously. It's so great to see our leadership moving smartly through these issues in a very good fashion. Well, he's quite right. The House bill should serve as the foundation for Senate legislation when it comes to clarity. Unfortunately, our friends on the Senate Ag side are I think, feeling the effect of not having a CFTC chairman to work with them and advise them, and I don't think they will be able to progress as much as we'd like until that's filled. Fortunately, I do believe that the White House understands that and is moving quickly to get forward with a nomination. I expect something soon, and I think that will enable then that committee to be able to move better and faster and get their piece done of clarity, and we'll get this legislation done and passed.
Well, Chairman, we obviously had a very significant roundtable recently that you played an important part of. You're a moderator there. It was a remarkable collection, not only of bringing together two important commissions, but also so many people who are more traditional players, established players in the space, as well as newer upstarts, newer entrants. Obviously there was a lot of disagreement and tension between those two, which is healthy, I think, to play out in front of the commission. I'm wondering what your reaction was to the disagreements that we heard during, for example, the platforms panel in the recent roundtable.
Renato, I think you said it very well in your opening. I mean, it was remarkable. You had on, not only in the same day, you had on the same panel traditional finance, new entrants, and amongst the new entrants, you had both decentralized and centralized. And just the imagery of that was a statement, I believe, of the new SEC administration as well as the broader U.S. administration, that they're out of the game of dictating to the market structure. Market structure now needs to be set competitively. It's almost a Frederick Hayek, a Milton Friedman approach, that it's not for political leaders to determine market structure and tell everybody, okay, here's the construct, you've got to work within that construct. They're saying when you've got new innovation, it's for the marketplace themselves to work out how that works. And there's no preference for TradFi, but there's also no preference for new entrants. It's we're going to set as level a playing field as possible, and the marketplace and market efficiency, and most importantly, and it was important to have not only the platforms there, but following them, panel I moderated, the market participants, to determine what's the best way to modernize and operate our financial system. And I think it's going to be great for innovation, and the United States is going to modernize, and in a way we haven't, sadly, for a long time. It was going to modernize adopting these new technologies, with the input of some of the traditional players that bring a lot of value enormous value to bear as well. So it's a really new day. And then, of course, you had the SEC and the CFTC doing it together, which was the whole point of the day. Quite remarkable.
At the top of the show, I said I just came back from traveling all around the world and learning about regulation in different jurisdictions. Curious, you just talked about what's the best way to modernize. If any learnings from other jurisdictions who maybe at one time were ahead of the United States came up.
Well, that's a great point. 3 years ago, I'd say that the United States was certainly falling behind in innovation. Innovators were fleeing. The problem is there wasn't a lot of great places to flee to. Europe adopted their MiCA legislation, but it hasn't really stimulated a great deal of innovation taking place in the EU. Britain, a jurisdiction that we all have a great deal of affection for, really hasn't figured out their way post-Brexit in this new environment. And so, Japan, a very stable and well-run financial system, well overseen, early in crypto from a regulatory point of view, open to innovation, but really not a place innovators were fleeing to over the last few years. And so a lot of that went to the Middle East and some Singapore. Well, it's all flowing back to the U.S. I think we're truly in a new day. I think the United States, with this new wave of innovation coming over Capitol Hill, coming over the regulators, is truly going to emerge as the leading the vanguard of the next wave of financial market structure, financial market innovation. And, I'll just give you one example. I saw some recent economic reports that the cost of moving money around the globe takes up about 1 to 2% of the world's GDP, just to transport money, just to move it around. With new financial technology, with stable coins, distributed ledger technology, we're going to get back that 1 to 2% and put that back into growth and innovation. And so I think we're on the cusp of a really exciting revolution in the way financial markets are conducted and operated. And I'm just so excited to see the United States in the vanguard of this and pushing the envelope. Now, there always are going to be consequences in every new industrial revolution. There's always challenges, valuations. Sometimes the markets get ahead of the innovation, and there's no question that crypto itself is still complicated and clunky, and it's not yet in the form of an appliance. It's still people have to do a lot of their own programming. But that's going to change. E-commerce was clunky when it first came around. Trying to do e-commerce with dial-up modems. The innovation, the underlying infrastructure had to catch up, but that's going to happen.
Well, Chairman, you, of course, were chairman of the CFTC during a very pivotal time. Earlier this year and last year, I heard a lot of enthusiasm from the crypto industry about the CFTC and having the CFTC as their regulator. But as of late, they've become more enchanted with the SEC as they've had a lot more engagement. And of course, there's some strong leadership there right now that's engaging directly with the industry. I've seen more people talk about ATSs than DCMs as of late. Have you noticed that same trend? And how do you think when a new chairman is in place, or a new nominee at the very least in the short term is in for the CFTC, how the CFTC and SEC can work together, and how do you see them working together in the crypto industry?
Yeah, Renato, you're right. There's no question that up until very recently, I don't want. There's no question the CFTC was first in crypto innovation under my predecessor, Tim Massad. The CFTC in 2015 declared Bitcoin the world's first digital commodity under CFTC jurisdiction. And in 2017, under my leadership, we greenlighted Bitcoin futures and set the groundwork for Ethereum futures. And ultimately, those became the basis for the ETFs. And I'm very pleased that, 8 years later, those marketplaces that we created at the CFTC are deep, they're liquid, they're transparent, and they're very well regulated and policed for fraud and manipulation. And they're proof that regulators can engage with crypto if they have the willingness and the mind to do so. And that work was never backtracked on by my successor, Heath Tarbert, and furthered by him and also by Russ Benham. Unlike the SEC, where things really did go backwards during the previous administration. And I think, therefore, rightfully so, the CFTC was viewed as the lead agency on crypto. Now, give credit to the SEC under Paul Atkins, but also under acting chair Mark Ueda, and of course, crypto mom Hester Peirce. The SEC has bounced back and bounced back fast. I mean, they have taken the baton and they are running with it. And right now, they are a shining example of how progressive and forward-leaning financial market regulators can be. Of course, there's only so much an acting chair can do, and I got to tip my hat to Caroline Pham. She's done everything she can with that authority. But the CFTC is undoubtedly waiting for a full-time chair and commissioners. And I was at the White House yesterday. They're very aware of this. There's no sleep at the switch at the White House when it comes to CFTC. They know what they've got to do. They're working hard on it. I'm confident that a terrific nominee will be announced in the future, and the CFTC will continue its very laudable activity in crypto, and it will provide the Senate Ag Committee with the help they need to get the Clarity Act done. It's a priority of this administration to have a fighting for CFTC. It's a priority of this administration to get clarity done. It's a priority of this administration to have the CFTC and the SEC not merged, but working well together. And so mergers off the table, but working well together is very much on the table.
Well, Chairman, let's talk about the CFTC for just a second. I'm just curious to hear your perspective here. How can the agency be run with no commission? Of course, it is a priority to get a 5-member commission in there, but right now there is none. And I mean, what legal vulnerabilities is there to having an agency operate as it is now when it was envisioned as a 5-member commission?
Yeah, hopefully we don't get to that. As I say, I think Caroline Pham is we all owe her a debt of gratitude for the clarity, the quality by which the agency is being run, and the amount of initiatives it's taken on and achieved. And the White House is very aware of what needs to be done. You can't short circuit these, the background checks that need to be done, the vetting process that needs to be done on nominees. I don't want to get into personnel issues. I think that the White House felt that they had things in hand. It didn't work out. But I'm confident that they are, and some of the names that have been floated are really capable people, whether in chair roles or commissioner roles. I know the White House is hard at work on this. And I'm very optimistic that soon we will have nominees that everyone will say, wow, great choices.
All right. And last question for you here. We were talking with the congressman about Clarity passing by the end of the year. We also addressed the fact that there is a government shutdown. We are sitting in October. Chairman, are you confident that the Clarity Act passes by the end of the year? And if it doesn't, Renato and I have had people on the show that have said, if it doesn't, maybe it doesn't happen. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm optimistic, but I'm not certain it gets done by the end of the year. You heard from Bryan Steil he's closer to that action than I am. What I can tell you is it is a priority for the White House. Look, if you had asked me last January whether the Genius Act would have gotten done within the first 6 months of the administration, I would have said I'm optimistic, but I'm not certain. I mean, that's an incredible accomplishment. And it also shows a number of things. It shows that the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democrat Party is no longer in the ascendancy, because that was a bipartisan piece of legislation with a lot of strong Democrat support, not unanimous, but with some strong support. And I think that same coalition can come to bear for clarity. So I'm optimistic, and I wouldn't put anything past the desire of lawmakers, both in the executive branch and the legislative branch, to get these crypto regulations and laws in place, because there's another election coming, and a very strong community of crypto is holding them to account for premises made in the last election about crypto. So I think there's both a political dynamic. I think there's a willingness. I think there's a newer generation emerging on Capitol Hill, on both sides of the aisle, that understand crypto is more than just some funky new asset class. If we get crypto right, it's a whole new berth for American finance. We're in a deep hole when it comes to debt. The only way out of our debt burden is through economic growth. If we can recapture some of the rents that are charged, some of the inefficiencies in our financial system, and bring them back to capital formation and allowing economic capital to be formed, businesses to be built, new enterprises to lead, that's our way out of our mountain of debt. We've got to get to sustainable 3.5%, 4% economic growth over a decade or more, and grow our way out of our reckless spending. And the way to do that is to free up our capital markets. And so this is much more than just number go up. This is a whole new financial architecture for American finance, for the American economy. And I think a lot of people understand that. We got to get this done.
Chairman, thanks so much for joining the show. It's always a pleasure.
Great to be with you. Let's do it again soon.
Let's do it. That was former CFTC Chairman Chris Giancarlo. All right, Renato, it is just the two of us. So, like I said, so much to unpack. Wow. What, yeah. What a whirlwind this year has been. And those two conversations, I think, really kind of rounded out what we've been talking about and what we've experienced since January.
Yeah, look, a lot has changed. Obviously, some real positive movement here. I mean, it is exciting to have the SEC, for example, so much engaged. But of course, without legislation, we're down to rulemaking, and these things can change as the industries learn. I thought it was really interesting to hear the chairman talk about all of the work that he and his predecessor and successor did to support it and foster the growth of crypto in the United States. And then that got quickly undone. So I think so much is at stake for the industry right now, because without passage of that legislation, it's not durable. And we've seen in politics, things can swing back and forth so quickly. And so really, I think it's fair to say that everything is at stake right now for the industry. And yet, at the same time, there's so much opportunity out there. And it's exciting. I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope for the durability of the upswing that we're having right now in crypto is the presence of TradFi at that roundtable. It wasn't just even those platforms. It was like the chairman said, it was market participants. Bank of America was there. We had really interesting comments from them as well. We're starting to see the banks involved. But I think once you see TradFi integrate blockchain into their existing products, in the same, maybe blockchain can be thought of like GPS or Bluetooth or all these other things that gets built into other products and services that we have, and becomes just part of our fabric and a technology that can be instrumental in growth for the United States, as opposed to this other thing out there that becomes a political issue.
Yeah, the presence of TradFi, I think, really solidifies for me how much this industry has matured. It's this real signal of maturity. And I feel like it's matured very quickly. Like the parents are in the room now. It's not some fly by the seat of your pants industry where all these crazy things are happening. The guts and the infrastructure are being applied to what we've built over the last decades. And so I think that this is just a sign of maturity, and I hope that we get it right from a policy perspective, from a regulation perspective, because that's what we need to continue maturing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need blockchain and crypto to not be its own thing out here. What we need is for TradFi and others, in government, right, and members of Congress and regulators to all be working together to say, "Wow, we have this really interesting technology. Let's integrate it into what we have." I'm old enough, Jen, to remember when the internet first became a thing and the World Wide Web first became a thing. And for some period of time, everyone thought, oh, there's these .com companies, pets.com, cars.com, everything's being, its own thing out there. So people in California are working on this stuff. But of course, the internet's part of everything we do now. And if we can get to a point where people, pull up their app for their bank and they can actually, purchase and sell stable coins in the same way that they move money between their different accounts, I think we're going to actually have a much more innovative financial services sector here in the United States. And really, we'll know at that point that crypto has really made it.
Yep. Yeah. And I think everything we talk about really opens the doors, enables the next iteration of the internet. So these conversations we're having here on the show are very important. Renato and I will continue to follow what's going on. And as always, we welcome your input and your questions. This show is live every other week, most of the time. You can ask your questions. You can put your comments below the videos. We'll be sure to get to them. And if we don't get to them in the show that's happening right now, we'll try to get to them in future shows. I'm Jen Sanasi for